Okay, everybody. Thank you to those of you that have arrived into the first of the innovation cafes this afternoon. My name is Isabel Fletcher, and I am your facilitator for this session this afternoon. I'm also a member of the Connecting Nature project team. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off, just to let you know that this session is going to be filmed and recorded and will be available on the Connecting Nature YouTube channel after the summit. Can we ask you also to just make sure that your microphones are muted while other people are speaking? And we would very much encourage you to get involved in the interactive discussion after the presentation from our guest speaker. So, and to do that, actually, you can either put a message in the chat or you can talk to us live with your camera and your microphone on, and we can bring you up on screen. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to James Murray. James is a manager with the Metropolitan Glasgow Strategic Drainage Partnership, bit of a mouthful, and James is going to talk to us today about the challenges, I suppose, involved in retrofitting surface water management in Glasgow. So you're very welcome, James, and we'll hand the floor over to you.
Great, thank you, Isabel. I'll just share my screen now. Hopefully that we can get started. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm James Murray. I'm the manager for the Metropolitan Glasgow Strategic Drainage Partnership. I'm going to talk about retrofit surface water management that has been delivered by Glasgow City Council, working with others, and the practical challenges that we faced in delivery. So to provide some context, in Scotland, sustainable drainage systems have been mandatory for new development for about 15 years, and providing SUDs as part of new development is relatively easy. The quality of delivery, particularly nature-based SUDs, is improving as developers recognise the added benefits rather than just providing a large storage tank below ground. Typical interventions are swales, tree pits and rain gardens, which you see on the slide here. Perhaps the most common nature-based SUDs provided are basins and ponds. Retrofit SUDs follow similar techniques, but are much more challenging to do than for new development. Many of the retrofit interventions Glasgow has delivered in partnership with others have been to existing green space to enhance the functionality of that green space. Here we see some basins and ponds that have been retrofit to primarily provide a strategic surface water management function to reduce flood risk for existing development and facilitate new development. But these also enrich biodiversity habitat. At this site, working with the Housing Association and Nature Scotland, we retrofit swales in a basin. Again, surface water management to reduce flood risk by reducing pressure on existing combined sewer as part of wider green infrastructure improvements. At this site, we retrofit highway rain gardens to reduce pressure on the combined sewer network and improve water quality in our watercourse. And elsewhere in this catchment, we deculverted a small watercourse and retrofit SUDS basins. The City Centre Avenues project is retrofitting active travel and green infrastructure to city centre streets to transform the quality of the urban environment and deliver climate change resilience. The first avenue to be done was Sauchiehall Street. On the top left, we see the street before any work was done. Top right is what was proposed, and on the bottom is what it looks like now, or late last summer. 2 parking lanes were removed to establish a cycle lane, install street trees, and improve the urban realm. The duration of the works in this area and disturbance to local residents and businesses was extended due to 2 major fires on this street during the project. Other avenues are going through the design process and getting close to construction. So in terms of the main delivery challenges, I've grouped them in 4 headings, though these are all linked. We must recognise that not everyone will want what is being proposed. For internal stakeholder buy-in, we need to engage to understand the concerns. Some of this will be around agreeing priorities in terms of competing demands for existing space, like active travel, blue green infrastructure, traffic, congestion. It's usually helpful to link to policy if this is caught up with things like adaptation as well as mitigation. You need to seek collaborative opportunities to deliver more efficiently. And as a public sector organisation, we must show leadership for the public and private sector to follow, as other speakers today have already noted. And it helps to promote and deliver pilots to demonstrate the concept. External stakeholder buy-in has the same considerations. Meaningful engagement should seek to understand the needs and priorities of a community. Their immediate priorities may be potholes and bin collections rather than money invested in climate resilience and placemaking, particularly if something like flood risk benefits that you're looking to deliver will actually be felt by communities further downstream. Personal impacts also need to be considered. That may be the loss of parking outside their house or business, disruption and loss of access during construction, or personal connection to existing landscape and trees. We must also be mindful of concerns and risks. Some people don't want open bodies of water due to perceived risk of drowning. Some don't want spaces for youths to gather. Some don't want more leaves to block road drains. Key to working through this is good knowledge of the area, listening and designing appropriately. And meaningful engagement is resource intensive, so don't underestimate the resources required. In terms of the delivery model, retrofit is expensive and disruptive. Delivering collaborative projects where possible can help to align funding streams and reduce disruption, though this will come with its own set of challenges in terms of managing delivery. In the design process, consider carefully how much design should be done prior to awarding a construction contract, as things are very likely to change on site, and there should be sufficient flexibility to allow for this in the form of contract. When contracting between funders, think carefully about how risk is shared, as things change on site to usually increase costs and programme. How this is managed is important to the success of the project. A large increase in costs or programme will likely either result in a need to find more funds or reduce scope. And COVID has been a very real example of this. The most direct practical challenge to retrofit is what's below the surface of the ground. This is especially true in dense urban environments. For existing services, you need to take a view on how much investigation and diversion work is done prior to the main construction phase, as this will increase the overall period for disruption or of disruption for communities. And that's versus a longer main construction phase and possibly increased costs for unknown services. Ground conditions in urban areas, particularly post-industrial areas, will very often have some degree of contamination. A risk-based approach should be taken to minimise potentially costly removal and disposal, perhaps using soil washing, but that generally only works for larger projects. And finally, maintenance or stewardship challenges are best tackled early to define what is required and consider who's best placed to do that maintenance, balancing all the risks, including health and safety and access, especially if it's on a road. Funding of long-term maintenance needs to be considered, particularly with maintenance budgets under pressure. Directly linking the value of the benefits with the maintenance budget would be great, but we're still some distance away from that. Consider also what would happen if maintenance is not done, and this is particularly relevant if community or volunteer organisations are proposed for maintenance. If the maintenance is not done, will the concept be considered a failure, which could have a knock-on effect for future interventions? So if I was to summarise our learning in terms of the main practical challenges of retrofit delivery, I would say engage, don't assume, consider risks, retain flexibility, plan for the future, including the maintenance, and learn from each project to deliver better next time. As others have said today, the process is iterative. Thank you.
Thanks, James, for that whirlwind tour and introduction to the challenges. Really interesting summary and synopsis that you have provided. And really, if people have questions, please do invite yourselves onto the panel and or post something into the chat. Martin, you've asked to come up on stage, and you've been waiting patiently there. I've let you in. Have you a particular question that you'd like to ask James?
No,
or an observation?
I'm afraid I the wrong button by mistake.
No problem.
But since I'm here, I'm one of the funders for some of James's projects, and I've been really impressed by what Glasgow has been doing. So now you could let me go.
I let you go. Well, listen, thank you for your input. Certainly, it has been really just informative the whole morning, and the type of project that you're involved with there. But just in terms of some of the challenges, James, that you have outlined around, I suppose, just starting right back at the beginning, the stakeholder engagement, and you're talking about it potentially having to be very resource heavy. How have you managed to deliver kind of projects and engage different communities, mindful that you may not have unlimited resources?
Yeah, first of all, it's good to see Martin here. Martin, because he's been in Nature Scotland, have been a key part of delivering a number of projects, and Martin knows very well some of the challenges that have been coming up on some of these projects. In terms of engagement, it has been a real challenge for us. These projects that we've delivered were really conceptualized 5-6 years ago, as part of flood risk management planning for the area. And as part of that, they're in the flood risk management strategies and local flood risk management plans. And they're really driven by risk profiles in terms of flooding for communities across Glasgow, but also partly driven by needing to try and alleviate some of that flood risk to allow new development to come forward in a sustainable manner as well. When we very much found when we go out and try and engage with communities around flood risk, if we're badging it as primarily a flood risk project, it's been difficult to get people engaged, because I would say in general, if people haven't been directly impacted by flooding within the past year, 18 months, it's not high up in their priorities, and it's not in their memory anywhere. Glasgow has also been very fortunate over the past 10, 15 years to not have had major flooding to really raise it up there as a priority issue for people. So that's something we would maybe reflect on in future engagement, and perhaps take the focus off the flood risk title on the project, and maybe make it more about nature and resilience and placemaking as we take projects forward in future, because that also helps us to link into really what everyone I think has seen over the past 4 or 5 years, is that growing awareness around climate resilience and biodiversity loss and things like that. So getting those other hooks there would certainly help us.
I think so. Yeah. Interesting question, and it kind of links into what you're talking about in terms of maybe awareness building. I mean, do people know? Tassie has put up a question in the chat. Do people know how the water gets to them, and the processes it goes through to make sure that it's fresh and cleaned and?
No, they don't generally, and that's because it's all below the ground. It's in pipes usually. Certainly, what we've done in a number of places is try to open up existing water courses that previously were in sections of culverts, so pipes below ground. We've at a number of locations brought them back up to the surface, and that helps community awareness and knowledge of where their water goes and what happens with it, particularly surface water runoff and flooding and that sort of thing. But generally, no, people don't have an awareness of where it comes from or where it goes to, and particularly things like the potential for flooding to have an impact on water quality in our water environment. People just don't pick up on that. They're not aware. The main thing that we hear back is generally just build bigger pipes, clean the road gullies and build bigger pipes, and that will fix the flooding problem. And it won't. But people don't believe you on that. Now, you can, and we still do, build bigger pipes and tanks and tunnels, but we're trying to move away from that as an industry, both local authorities and Scottish Water, to a more sustainable approach. But no, the level of awareness is low. Yeah.
Can I bring Tassie in here? Tassie, thank you for coming up here to join us. You're an artist, I see, and you've worked with water. What are your thoughts about community engagement, or in general around the water theme? I think you're muted, I think. We can't hear you. Can't hear you, Tassie. I think can you check your microphone? Because we're not hearing you. No. You've muted your mic, Tassie. I don't know if your sound is working. Oh, listen, if you can, put it up in the chat. If anybody else would like to come up and join us, do. I'm really sorry now. The sound hasn't worked for you, but let's see if you can sort that out, and we can bring you back up. We were talking a little bit just before we kicked off, James, around the whole area of sort of financing, and financing in particular for the stewardship, that post-implementation phase of your water management systems, your suds and your rain gardens and so on. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think the challenge we have with, I guess, traditional drainage, which is the hard concrete stuff, the road gully and the pipes, that has limited capacity. But in terms of maintenance, it really doesn't require a lot of maintenance. You need to make sure the road gullies are clear, but some of our pipes below ground have been there for 80, 100 years and are still working, so they don't require a lot of maintenance until something goes wrong with them. Blue-green interventions, nature-based interventions will require more maintenance because they grow, and that's what we're looking for some of the benefits that brings in terms of biodiversity and urban cooling and air quality and people's mental health. But there's a disconnect at the moment, which I'm sure most of the people on this session are aware of, that those benefits that are accruing in terms of biodiversity and mental health aren't directly coming back into maintenance budgets. They are being realised by other sectors of the community. So they're being realised in theory by the NHS or other services of the council that don't then have to provide that mental health support or reduced mental health support.
Okay.
So yeah, getting a direct link between those other benefits and maintenance budgets would be good, I think, to help preserve that and maintain that maintenance budget, because the reality is that for most local authorities, maintenance budgets are being squeezed. And it doesn't help. And if you don't have something in place for the maintenance of blue-green interventions, nature-based interventions, they can tend to become abandoned, and they don't look nice, and people get they're poorly perceived and maybe perceived as not working. I do think that there's the right balance to strike, and I think Dick mentioned earlier on around not mowing too much, mowing at the right sort of level to benefit biodiversity. So yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. At the end of that, I had a spooling issue. Tassie, you've joined us again. Have you sorted the tech out?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, just a very quick thing. I'm speaking to you from Norway, but I lived and worked in Glasgow for most of my career, and I design water playgrounds. So that's my interest. I'm passionate about people knowing about water. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm just it's always for me something that is, when we design, with my colleagues and fellow designers, when we're designing water playgrounds and water play features. I brought the first water pump in a playground in Glasgow in 2003, I think it was, in Drumchapel. So it was really interesting around the the kind of cultural values and things, and understanding of what we would do with this resource as a play item. So there's loads of conversations, and in my artwork, I often work with very often work with water. In fact, I have a water theme with my university students right now. So it's kind of thing that I'm just kind of opening up there, as they spoke in the plenary sessions that, and the keynote speakers spoke about making it real for people and involving children in the creation of their spaces. And my work with water for the last 23 years is because I'm from Fort William. How can you not know about water when you come from Fort William? So I'm just kind of I'd like to open it up to other people who come from kind of different walks of life, designers and artists and landscape architects and place-based designers like myself, of how people start to really understand, like physically, materially, they understand what they have around you and where stuff comes through and where it goes to. The A to B and gravity and so it's really interesting to hear of your work, James, because I honestly think children and play and education could time, but it really helps people to understand about water.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the playgrounds there. The image I showed of the Highway Rain Gardens, just beside there is a school, Croftfoot Primary School, and there's a bit of below ground detention, but there's also what we call the amphitheatre. So it's a basin that in times of very heavy rainfall will fill up with water that's there in the school playground. I don't think it's actually ever been activated yet. It's been constructed about a year now, but yes, it's trying to bring that into schools, and there's a couple of other schools where we are looking to deliver interventions as well. So get that link back into education.
Totally. It's something that I think landscape architects and designers of space, we can do that at the beginning. We can preempt it, and we know we're going to get rain. We just know it's going to happen. So, we're kind of, we wait for it to happen, and when it happens, it activates a part of the design that sometimes it sits quiet and sleeping. But it's really exciting. So, yeah.
I think it would be fair to say that there still are people in communities who are very risk averse in terms of water as well. So we have had a number of comments back, both from individuals and indeed through councillors, about the safety of having an open area of water within parks, even, never mind next to houses. So, generally we'll find for SUDS delivery these days, most SUDS will have some form of fence around it. In parks, we're trying not to do that because parks are open spaces, and we've got a lot of parks in Glasgow that have got existing boating ponds that don't have fences around them. So we don't want to be putting fences around them. But there is still, there are members of the communities who feel water will be dangerous and children will drown. It's very difficult to change their mind on that. They have this fixed view of it. It's just something we have to work with and deal with it, and convince, work with councillors to convince them that it's low risk, and we've got rivers elsewhere and we've got boating ponds elsewhere, so we can live with it. And it's as long as it's appropriately designed and sited, then we're content with the approaches that we're taking. But yeah, there are certainly members of the community who will still perceive it as being dangerous.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tassie, and thanks. That actually ties into a couple of comments coming up on the chat here, that Gillian says we definitely need to have conversations with communities about risk awareness instead of risk aversion. And another question in from Alison, and we only have 1 minute left now. When looking at above ground water storage and unculverting burns, how do you get around that public perception of dangerous open water, especially in suburban areas? And that's a real challenge. I mean, you've already hit on it, I think. You've about 30 seconds to answer that.
Yeah, I think that for some people, and it's usually the people who initially most vocally announce these concerns, you won't convince them. You just won't convince them. But as long as in general the community is can see the benefit and has that lower view of the risk that's involved, then it will in general be supported by the community, but there's likely to be one or two dissenting voices that you just aren't going to convince.
Okay, listen, that has been a really, really interesting 20-minute discussion. And James, thank you so much for providing your insights and expertise today. We've had a really, I suppose, well, I don't know if anyone else is surprised, but we've had over 50 people at this Innovation Cafe. So there's clearly a lot of interest in the work you're doing. Thank you, everybody, for attending. The next lot of sessions are up now. There's 3 more Innovation Cafes taking place starting right now. So we're going to close off this session. Thank you all for attending. Thanks, James. And hope to see you all again at the next set of sessions and throughout the course of the next couple of days. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.